Late into his diplomatic career, Ambassador Spock has the idea of reunifying the Romulan people with the Vulcans whom they split off from hundreds of years ago. He commits to these efforts by living on Romulus long-term and even risking his life to save their homeworld from a supernova. By the 32nd century, the process Spock began was completed and successful. However, I've seen several Star Trek fans question Spock's motives and ultimate goal, going so far as to accuse him of paternalism. Based on everything we know about Spock, Vulcans, and Romulans, I completely disagree, and I'll explain why in this video. First of all, Spock didn't come up with the idea of reunification out of nowhere. He first had it during his diplomatic conversations with a Romulan named Pardek, with whom he discussed the lingering similarities between Vulcan and Romulan culture. This is also how Spock would have first become aware that there were a considerable number of Romulans who supported the idea of reunification, or at least forming a stronger connection between their world and Vulcan, perhaps even the Federation as a whole. Additionally, whether Spock was aware of it or not, the idea of reunifying the Vulcans and Romulans had been proposed as early as the 22nd century. I'm sure Spock took a lot of his own personal experiences into account. Being half human and half Vulcan, he had a sense of being caught between two different worlds for his entire life, a feeling that some Romulans might share knowing that they originally came from another world. The experiences of each of his family members likely affected his way of thinking too. His father Sarek was accused of being a traitor for marrying a human. His mother Amanda assimilated herself into Vulcan society, sometimes to the point of discomfort, in order to fit in, yet was still shunned. His brother Sybok was banished from Vulcan for proposing the idea of emotion being more important than logic. His sister Michael was targeted by extremists for being a human attending a Vulcan learning center, and she was rejected from joining the Vulcan expeditionary group solely because she was human. On that note, Spock likely believed that a Vulcan-Romulan reunification would be beneficial to not only Romulans but Vulcans as well, because it would be a way for Vulcans to critically examine themselves and their way of life. Any argument against unification that Vulcans might present could be counteracted with facts and logic. If the argument was that the Romulans were a warlike race, the Vulcans once were as well. If it was argued that the Romulans chose to split off from Vulcan society, that happened hundreds of years ago, and present-day Romulans do not necessarily have all the same views as their ancestors did. Spock would also have reason to believe that unification was possible based on previous events both in his own life and the history of the Federation. He knew that peace between former enemies was possible because it had happened with the Klingon Empire at the Khitomer Accords. The relationship between the Vulcans and Romulans could be thought of as that of a broken family, and Spock knew that long-standing rifts in familial relationships could be repaired because it had occurred in his relationship with his sister and later his father. Spock also personally knew a Vulcan-Romulan hybrid, that being Saavik, to whom Spock was a mentor figure. Spock also logically knew that unification would be a lengthy process and would not happen immediately. His goal was simply to set the process in motion and encourage it to continue. Even when reunification actually took place, it took anywhere between 200 and 600 or so years. He never intended for Romulans to be assimilated back into Vulcan society, but rather for both cultures to coexist peacefully. Individual Romulans would not be forced to relocate to Vulcan by the Federation or anyone else. It would be their choice. If anyone wanted to remain on Romulus, they could do so, and presumably if anyone on Vulcan who opposed reunification wanted to leave, they could do so too. Of course, the Romulans lost their homeworld when it was consumed by a supernova, and the Romulan Empire instead became the Romulan Free State. In the long run, although this was a terrible tragedy for the Romulans, it likely furthered the process of reunification. The Romulans' old home was gone, but their people's ancient original home, Vulcan, remained for them to return to. Since the planet Vulcan eventually becomes home to more than just the Vulcan people, it is renamed to Ni'Var, the word for a Vulcan concept of two things coming together to make one. When we see Ni'Var in the 32nd century, it's clear that it has a fusion of Vulcan and Romulan cultures, neither overtaking the other. Vulcans and Romulans still exist as distinct and individual peoples and cultures, but the planet's overall culture and society are a mix of both. For example, the Romulan group known as the Qowat Milat still exists, and they are accepting enough to welcome a human, Gabrielle Burnham, into their order. I would imagine that Ni'Var probably becomes a culturally bilingual world, with school children being taught both languages and people using them interchangeably in everyday life because they're both equally understood. Since supernova can take centuries to form, it's possible that the impending one near Romulus was foreseen but not known to the general Romulan public, perhaps so as not to cause widespread panic. Spock may have known about it and tried to both convince Romulans to be trusting of outside forces who could help them, a facet of and possible inspiration for his reunification efforts, and to stop the supernova from destroying Romulus and those who still resided there once it did come. Even though Spock himself never lived to see the Romulans' future, at least his sister did, and she was immensely proud of him for his accomplishments. Some of his final words to her were that she showed him he could walk in both of their parents' worlds, so she was likely a significant inspiration for him to believe in the possibility of unification. Spock's success is significant and satisfying to see, but I still think his motivations are equally important, and all things considered, I don't think there's any reason to believe he had any uninformed intentions. Spock had definitely seen enough of Vulcan society's flaws to not view it as superior to any other. What do you think? Do you believe Spock's reasoning for reunification is logical and justified? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching this video. Subscribe to my channel for more media commentary like this. Live long and prosper, and I'll see you next time.